"Something's wrong. Something's wrong with the track." Chloe Barrett's voice crackled through the radio, high and sharp, with a terror she'd never felt in 15 years of working with roller coasters. For a split second, the entire park seemed to freeze. The cheerful carousel music became a mockery. The smell of funnel cakes turned sickening. From the operator's booth, Chen watched helplessly as the lead car of the Thunderbolt began to shudder violently at 127 feet, right at the coaster's highest point. "Emergency stop! Emergency stop!" Marcus slammed the kill switch, but nothing happened. The computer system wasn't responding. On the security monitors, he could see Chloe in the front car, her maintenance uniform bright yellow against the morning sky, her hands white-knuckled on the safety harness that was about to fail her. In the loading station below, families waiting for the next ride began to point and scream. Phones came out, recording what nobody wanted to see. The Thunderbolt, Velocity Park's iconic wooden-steel hybrid coaster, was coming apart at its highest peak, with the park's most experienced engineer trapped in the lead car. June 15, Velocity Park, Chloe Barrett, lead ride engineer, 15 years, keeping people safe. Hundreds of test rides after maintenance. Beloved by staff, trusted by management, followed by thousands on social media. But behind the confident smile was a coaster pushed beyond its limits, a park drowning in debt, and an engineer who believed she could hold it all together for just one more season. In 2 minutes and 17 seconds, a routine employee appreciation ride would become a case study in preventable tragedy. Chloe Barrett would take her final ride on the very coaster she'd spent years trying to save. You're watching Thrill Rides and Tragedies. If this story grips you, subscribe, like, and share, because what you're about to witness is only the beginning. Chloe Barrett wasn't just a ride engineer. She was the ride engineer, the one you'd see strapping herself into the lead car after every major maintenance, giving a thumbs up to the camera, proving with her own body that the rides were safe. For 15 years, Chloe had been the guardian angel of Velocity Park, turning wrenches at dawn and analysing stress data until midnight. To the public, she was Coaster Chloe, the fearless engineer whose Instagram videos of post-maintenance test rides had garnered over 400 zero followers. To her colleagues, she was the last line of defence against catastrophe. Chloe started at Velocity Park, straight out of engineering school at 23, drawn by a childhood love of roller coasters and a fascination with the physics that made them possible. The park's owner, Richard Dalton, had immediately recognised something special in her, not just technical brilliance, but an intuitive understanding of how machines behaved under stress. By 28, she was supervising the entire maintenance crew. By 35, she was lead engineer, responsible for every ride that carried millions of visitors each year. Chloe had this sixth sense about rides, recalled Chen, senior ride operator. She'd walk past a coaster and hear something nobody else could, a bearing starting to wear, a chain showing stress. She'd say, "That doesn't sound happy," and sure enough, we'd find a problem during inspection. Her social media presence had started innocuously, videos meant to reassure nervous riders by showing the thorough safety checks performed daily. But Chloe's personality transformed routine maintenance into must-watch content. She'd explain the physics while hanging upside down from the Thunderbolt's first drop, or demonstrate safety systems while the coaster ran at full speed. Her catchphrase, "If I won't ride it, you won't ride it," became the park's unofficial safety motto. But the last 2 years had been different. Velocity Park faced increasing competition from newer parks with cutting-edge attractions. Budget cuts meant deferred maintenance, skeleton crews, and band-aid fixes on rides that needed major overhauls, Chloe found herself fighting a losing battle against entropy and economics. She was stressed beyond belief, said Sarah Martinez, former maintenance supervisor who'd left the park in 2023. Every day, Chloe had to decide which critical repair could wait another week. She'd work 18-hour days, trying to keep everything running safely with half the staff and a quarter of the budget we needed. The Thunderbolt was Chloe's biggest concern. The 25-year-old wooden-steel hybrid had been the park's signature attraction, but age was showing. Track sections needed replacement, support beams showed metal fatigue, and the computer control system was 2 decades out of date. Chloe submitted report after report requesting a full renovation. Each time, management promised next season. Internal emails later revealed Chloe's growing desperation. In March 2024, she wrote to Richard Dalton, "The Thunderbolt is operating outside acceptable safety parameters. We need immediate track replacement on section 712 and complete computer system overhaul. This is not a request. This is a warning." Dalton's response was typical. "Chloe, you're the best engineer in the business. I trust you to keep us safe through summer." Major renovations approved for October. But Chloe knew October might be too late. She began documenting everything, every deferred repair, every ignored warning, every band-aid fix. Her personal files contained hundreds of photos showing progressive deterioration, annotated with increasingly urgent warnings. Despite the pressure, Chloe never let her public persona slip. Her final Instagram video, posted June 13, showed her checking the Thunderbolt's newly installed brake sensors. "Looking good for this weekend's anniversary celebration," she chirped to the camera. But colleagues noticed she looked exhausted, her usual enthusiasm forced. On June 14, the day before the tragedy, Chloe worked until 3 a.m., making last-minute adjustments to the Thunderbolt. Security footage showed her standing at the base of the lift hill, staring up at the aging structure. She made a phone call, later identified as being to her sister, and was overheard saying, "After this weekend, I'm done. I can't keep pretending everything's fine." The next morning, Chloe arrived at 5 a.m. for final pre-opening checks. She seemed resigned, but determined to get through one more day. The Employee Appreciation Ride was scheduled for 8 a.m., a tradition where staff got first rides on all attractions before the park opened to the public. Chloe always rode the Thunderbolt first, maintaining her promise that she'd never ask guests to ride something she wouldn't ride herself. At 7:45 a.m., she strapped herself into the lead car of the Thunderbolt for what would be her 847th and final ride. In her pocket was her letter of resignation, dated for Monday. She'd made it to the weekend. She thought she'd made it to safety. She was 15 minutes away from being proven tragically wrong. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a roller coaster. It was Velocity Park's DNA rendered in wood and steel. Built in 1999 for $18 million, it represented the pinnacle of hybrid coaster design for its era, 400 feet of track, top speed of 75 miles per hour, a first drop of 128 feet at an 82-degree angle. For 2 decades, it had been voted among America's top 10 wooden coasters. But beneath the accolades was a machine fighting physics, time, and corporate neglect. Roller coasters are marvels of controlled violence. Every ride subjects the structure to forces equivalent to minor earthquakes. Wood swells and contracts, steel fatigues, bolts loosen, foundations shift. A properly maintained coaster can operate safely for decades. The Thunderbolt hadn't been properly maintained for the last 5. The problems started in 2019 when Velocity Park's parent company, Dalton Entertainment, overextended itself building a new resort in Florida. Maintenance budgets were slashed 40% across all properties. For the Thunderbolt, this meant critical wood replacements were postponed, steel inspections were reduced from monthly to quarterly, and the aging computer control system limped along on patches and prayers. That coaster was a time bomb, stated Dr. Michael Torres, a structural engineer who later investigated the tragedy. The maintenance logs showed clear progression of metal fatigue in critical stress points. Support beam 7, A, had stress fractures visible to the naked eye. Track section 9 had been flagged for immediate replacement in 2022. It was still in use on June 15, 2024. The Thunderbolt's design made it particularly vulnerable to deferred maintenance. The hybrid structure, wooden supports with steel track, created complex stress patterns where materials with different expansion rates met. These junction points required constant monitoring and frequent component replacement. By 2024, many of these critical connections were held together by what inspectors later called hope and habit. But the mechanical issues were only part of the problem. The Thunderbolt's control system was a bigger concern. The original 1,999 computer system had been cutting edge for its time, but technology had moved on. Software patches piled upon patches created what programmers call spaghetti code, a tangled mess where changing one thing could cause unexpected failures elsewhere. In January 2024, the Thunderbolt began experiencing what staff called ghost trains. The computer system would register trains in locations they weren't, triggering emergency stops. Rather than replace the system, management approved another patch. The ghost trains stopped, but operators noticed new glitches, unexpected speed variations, delayed brake responses, sensors reading incorrectly. Each report was acknowledged by management with promises of upcoming maintenance windows and budget allocation next quarter. Behind closed doors, Richard Dalton was more concerned about the Thunderbolt's role in the park's 25th anniversary marketing campaign than its structural integrity. The anniversary celebration, scheduled for June 1517, was built around the Thunderbolt. 25 Years of Thunder featured special ride videos, commemorative merchandise, and a planned record attempt for most riders in 24 hours. Closing the signature attraction was unthinkable from a business perspective. Former employees later testified about the pressure to keep the Thunderbolt operational at any cost. Maintenance windows were cut short, inspections were rushed, and problems were categorized as monitor rather than repair. The culture had shifted from safety first to safety within budget constraints. The final straw came on June 10, when a routine inspection revealed that track section 9, the highest point of the coaster, had developed a 4-inch lateral crack. Industry standards mandated immediate closure and repair. Instead, Chloe was ordered to reinforce and monitor through the anniversary weekend. "I've never seen her so angry," Marcus Chen recalled. "She called it criminal negligence, said she was done enabling their greed. But she also felt responsible for every person who'd ride that coaster. She couldn't just walk away." Chloe's solution was grimly practical. She would personally ride the Thunderbolt every morning, using her engineer's instincts to detect any catastrophic changes. If she felt unsafe, she'd shut it down herself, consequences be damned. It was a devil's bargain, her expertise and her life as the final safety system. On the morning of June 15, The Thunderbolt had carried over 8 million riders safely. Its steel rails gleamed in the dawn light, freshly painted yellow supports hiding the rot beneath. The computer system showed all green lights. Though 3 sensors were actually malfunctioning, their errors masked by hasty programming fixes. As Chloe strapped herself into the lead car at 7:58 a.m., she had no idea that metal fatigue had finally reached critical mass in support beam 7A. The hairline fractures documented in February had grown in the darkness, spreading like cancer through the steel. The beam was holding the track's highest point by mere threads of metal cohesion, waiting for just enough additional stress to complete its failure. That stress would come at exactly 8:17 a.m. when the fully loaded train reached 127 feet and physics finally collected its long overdue debt. Velocity Park's descent from premier destination to death trap didn't happen overnight. It was a slow strangulation of safety by spreadsheets, where every dollar saved on maintenance was celebrated in boardrooms, while engineers like Chloe Barrett fought desperately to prevent disaster. The park's final years read like a textbook case of corporate negligence, where warning signs were rebranded as acceptable risks, and whistleblowers were silenced with severance packages. The roots of disaster traced back to 2019, when Richard Dalton, Velocity Park's owner and CEO, gambled everything on expansion. Dalton Entertainment borrowed $450 million to build Velocity Resort Orlando, a massive complex intended to rival Disney. When construction costs spiraled and the pandemic hit, the company found itself drowning in debt. The solution? Slash operational costs at existing properties to service loan payments. They cut maintenance budgets by 40% overnight, revealed former CFO Patricia Williams in depositions. Richard's exact words were, "These rides have run fine for 20 years. They can handle a few lean years." He viewed safety margins as unnecessary overhead. The cuts were surgical in their destruction. Full-time maintenance staff reduced from 45 to 22. The materials budget slashed from $3.2 million to $1.1 million annually. Preventive maintenance schedules extended from 30-day cycles to 90 days. Outside inspection firms replaced with cheaper alternatives. Every cut justified as temporary measures that became permanent fixtures. Department heads who protested found themselves reassigned or terminated. In 2022, Head of Safety Thomas Morrison was fired after refusing to sign off on deferred repairs to the Thunderbolt. His replacement, a Dalton loyalist with no engineering background, rubber-stamped whatever, kept the rides running. The safety department became a paper-pushing operation, generating reports that said whatever management wanted to hear. Whistleblowers faced systematic retaliation. Maintenance supervisor Sarah Martinez was demoted after reporting safety violations to state inspectors. Ride operator Janet Phillips was terminated for performance issues days after documenting control system failures. Each departure came with iron-clad NDAs, enforced by threats of litigation the former employees couldn't afford to fight. It was like working in a cult, Martinez later testified. Question anything and you were labelled not a team player. They'd rather fire experienced staff than fix actual problems. Everyone knew something terrible would happen eventually. State inspections became elaborate theatre. Management would receive advance notice of inspection dates, triggering frantic cosmetic repairs. Fresh paint covered rust. Temporary fixes masked systematic failures. Inspectors, overwhelmed and understaffed, rarely dug beneath the surface. When violations were found, Velocity Park's lawyers would negotiate them down to minor citations with minimal fines. The financial shell game grew increasingly desperate. Insurance premiums skyrocketed as claims mounted not from major accidents, but from the steady drip of minor incidents that indicated larger problems. Rather than address root causes, Dalton switched to cheaper insurance companies with less stringent inspection requirements. By 2024, Velocity Park was insured by a company that existed primarily on paper, registered in the Cayman Islands. Internal documents revealed the depth of financial crisis. The park operated at a $12 million annual loss, sustained only by creative accounting and deferred liabilities. Every department faced impossible choices: pay vendors or pay staff, fix critical systems or keep the lights on. Marketing received full funding while maintenance begged for basic supplies. The anniversary celebration represented Dalton's last desperate gamble. Heavy marketing investment promised record crowds for 25 years of thunder. Advance ticket sales exceeded projections. Corporate sponsors signed lucrative deals. If the 3-day event succeeded, it might generate enough revenue to stabilize operations through the summer. Closing the Thunderbolt for repairs would crater the entire campaign. Marketing materials featured the coaster prominently. Social media influencers were scheduled to live stream rides. The local news planned live broadcasts from the station. In Dalton's risk calculation, 3 days of operation outweighed years of deferred maintenance. Chloe Barrett became the sacrificial buffer between corporate greed and public safety. Her expertise was exploited to extend the Thunderbolt's life far beyond reasonable limits. Her reputation provided cover for management's negligence. Her test rides became the final safety verification in a system that had abdicated all other responsibilities. They used Chloe's dedication against her, observed Dr. Jennifer Adams, who studied the case for OSHA. They knew she'd never let riders get hurt, so they pushed her to compensate for every cut corner and ignored warning. She became a human safety system, and human systems eventually fail. The week before the anniversary, desperation reached new heights. 3 rides experienced mechanical failures, requiring emergency repairs. The maintenance budget was already exhausted. Chloe was authorized to use her personal credit card for critical parts, with promises of eventual reimbursement. She maxed out 2 cards, keeping attractions operational. On June 13, Richard Dalton toured the park with potential Chinese investors interested in purchasing Dalton Entertainment. He needed everything perfect, everything operational. When informed of the Thunderbolt's critical track issues, his response was recorded by security cameras. "I don't care if you have to hold it together with duct tape and prayer. That coaster runs through the weekend." Velocity Park had transformed from family destination to financial instrument, where human lives were acceptable collateral for debt service. Every employee knew the reality, but most stayed silent, trapped by economic necessity in a company that had normalized negligence. Those who spoke up were silenced. Those who stayed were complicit. The stage was set for tragedy, built from thousands of decisions where money trumped morality. On the morning of June 15, all those deferred repairs, ignored warnings, and silenced whistleblowers would converge at 127 feet, where physics and greed would finally reconcile their accounts in blood and steel. June 15, 2024, dawned clear and perfect at Velocity Park. 72 degrees, cloudless sky, light breeze, the kind of morning that promised nothing but joy. The Employee Appreciation Ride was a 25-year tradition, letting staff experience the attractions before crowds arrived. For many, it was the best perk of working at the park. This morning, it would become their worst nightmare. Chloe Barrett arrived at 2 a.m., 3 hours before the scheduled ride. Security footage showed her walking slowly through the empty park, stopping frequently to examine rides, run her hands along support beams, and make notes in her engineering tablet. She spent 40 minutes at the Thunderbolt, climbing the service ladder to inspect track section 9 one final time. Her body language suggested someone saying goodbye. At 6:30 a.m., she met with her skeleton maintenance crew for the morning briefing. "Standard checks on everything," she instructed. "But I want everyone clear of the Thunderbolt by 7:45. I'll do the test ride solo." When questioned, she simply said, "Special anniversary. I want to experience it fresh." Nobody questioned Coaster Chloe. By 7:30 a.m., employees began gathering at the Thunderbolt station. The tradition was simple. Leadership rode first, then departments in order of seniority. Chloe always took the lead car, her yellow maintenance uniform, a beacon of safety that reassured nervous new employees. This morning, she seemed different, quieter, more focused, checking her harness multiple times. Chen, operating the ride that morning, noticed Chloe's intensity. "She made me run 3 complete system checks instead of the usual one. Kept asking about response times, brake pressure, sensor readings. I'd never seen her that thorough, and she was always thorough." At 7:55 a.m., 17 employees boarded the Thunderbolt for its first run. Chloe sat alone in the lead car, her hands gripping the safety harness. Behind her, accounts receivable, marketing interns, and food service workers chatted excitedly about the weekend ahead. Someone started the traditional countdown chant. Chloe didn't join in. 7:50 a.m. Marcus initiated the launch sequence. The computer system showed all green lights, a lie, hiding 3 malfunctioning sensors, and ignored error codes. The train began its slow climb up the 128-foot lift hill, chain dogs clicking rhythmically against anti-rollback devices. Several employees raised their hands, already celebrating. Chloe kept hers firmly on the harness. 8:00 am. The train crested the lift hill and paused for a heartbeat at the precipice. That perfect moment of anticipation before gravity claims its due. The morning sun painted the track ahead golden, hiding the hairline fractures that had grown in darkness. Support beam 7A, 40 feet below, held 24 pounds of dynamic load by mere threads of fatigued steel. 8:17 a.m. The train released and began its descent. For exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds, everything was perfect. The Thunderbolt delivered its signature experience: the first drop stomach-lifting plunge, the high-speed turns, the airtime hills that made riders weightless. Employees screamed with delight. Even Chloe allowed herself a slight smile, perhaps thinking she'd worried for nothing. 8:17 a.m. Physics collected its debt. As the train rocketed through the elevated turn at track section 9, pulling 4.2 Gs of lateral force, support beam 7A finally surrendered. The failure was catastrophic and instant. 40 feet of track suddenly had nothing beneath it but air. The sound came first, a metallic shriek that cut through screams like a bandsaw through bone. Chen, watching from the operator's booth, saw the track section sag, then separate entirely from its supports. His training kicked in. Emergency stop! Emergency stop! But the computer system, confused by impossible sensor readings, locked up entirely. The train hit the damaged section at 67 miles per hour. Instead of following the curve, it launched into space like a catapult payload. For 1.3 seconds, 17 people experienced uncontrolled flight, still strapped into seats that were no longer attached to anything but twisted metal and terror. Chloe's voice cut through the chaos, captured by multiple cell phones. Brace, brace, heads down. Her final act was trying to save others, even as physics made salvation impossible. The lead car, with Chloe alone, separated from the train and continued its ballistic trajectory. Witnesses described it tumbling end over end before impacting the Splash Mountain Q building 140 feet from the track. The remaining cars followed different paths of destruction, raining down across the park's midway in a horrific cascade of twisted metal and broken bodies. 8:34 a.m. Marcus hit every emergency button on his console, but it was far too late. Alarms shrieked across the park. The few early arriving guests began screaming and running. Security cameras captured employees rushing toward the carnage, some trying to help, others falling to their knees in shock. The first 911 call came at 8:11 a.m. from a security guard who could barely speak through his sobs. The coaster, it broke apart. People everywhere. Oh God, they're everywhere. Emergency response was swift but overwhelming. Paramedics arriving at 8:09 a.m. found a scene they'd trained for but never imagined. 17 victims scattered across 300 feet. Some had been thrown clear on impact. Others remained trapped in mangled cars. The walking wounded wandered in shock, covered in hydraulic fluid and blood. Chloe Barrett was found 180 feet from the track failure point, still strapped into her seat. The lead car had impacted a concrete wall at approximately 45 miles per hour. First responders knew immediately there was no hope, but worked frantically anyway, unwilling to accept that Coaster Chloe's final ride had ended this way. The final casualty count was devastating. 6 dead at the scene, including Chloe. 3 more died en route to hospitals. 8 survivors, with injuries ranging from critical to severe. Every employee on that train was either killed or permanently disabled. The Thunderbolt had claimed its final victims in the most horrific way imaginable. By 8:30 a.m., news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting images that would haunt the industry forever. Social media exploded with witness videos, each more horrific than the last. Parents scheduled to visit that day watched their phones in horror, grateful for delays that had saved their children from witnessing catastrophe. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Velocity Park was immediately closed by state authorities. Federal investigators descended like an avalanche, seizing every document, every hard drive, every communication that might explain how prevention had failed so completely. Richard Dalton was arrested at his home, trying to destroy financial records that would eventually convict him of criminal negligence. But in those first horrible hours, the focus was on the human cost. Chloe Barrett, who had spent 15 years keeping people safe, died knowing her worst fears had been realized. Her resignation letter, found in her pocket, contained a single line: "I can no longer be complicit in what I know will end in tragedy." The other victims were kids fresh from college, single parents, working summer jobs, retirees who loved making children smile. They'd climbed aboard, trusting that someone, somewhere, had ensured their safety. That trust was betrayed by a system that valued profits over lives, and enforced by an engineer who'd finally reached her breaking point. Velocity Park never reopened. The site became a memorial garden, with 17 trees planted where the Thunderbolt once stood. A bronze plaque bears Chloe's image and her motto: "If I won't ride it, you won't ride it." Below, in smaller text, An addition. She rode it to save others. Remember her sacrifice. Demand better. The Thunderbolt tragedy changed American theme park regulation forever. Chloe's law mandated independent safety inspections, criminal penalties for deferred maintenance, and whistleblower protections that might have saved 17 lives. But laws written in blood come too late for those who paid the price. Today, engineering students study the Thunderbolt failure as a cautionary tale of cascading negligence. They learn about metal fatigue, system redundancy, and corporate responsibility. But mostly, they learn about Chloe Barrett, the engineer who knew disaster was coming, fought to prevent it, and ultimately died trying to protect others from the inevitable consequences of greed. Her legacy lives in every properly maintained ride, every heeded warning, every corporate executive who chooses safety over profit. It's a legacy written in steel and sorrow, purchased with 2 minutes and 17 seconds that changed everything. If you were moved by this story, consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you dramatic recreations of true stories that deserve to be remembered, understood, and learned from. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. And remember, every safety regulation exists because someone, somewhere, paid for that knowledge with their life. Honor them by demanding better.